Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads video for the end of March. So March was mainly dedicated to my March of the Mammoths and my ongoing year of Maxwells reading. This is the Recognitions by William Gaddis, all 956 pages of it. I have 50 pages left to go as we are today, April the 1st. I will either finish it today or tomorrow, so I won't talk about this today. But I did complete some books. This is called Space Invaders by the Chilean writer Nona Fernandes, as recommended to me by Roxy at RecMe Books and Stuff. Radio Joan by Kevin Davey. Noopiming by Leanne Betasamosake Simpson, who is a First Nation in Canada. And Maxwell's Demon, Stephen Hall. So it's been pretty good. I mean, I've read most of these in the sort of last week of March, and it's been a pretty good experience across them. So first of all, Space Invaders. Very short novel, it's only 70 pages. So this is set in the time of Pinochet's dictatorship. A new girl arrives at school, and just as her schoolmates are sort of getting to know her and stuff, she disappears and doesn't reappear at the school. And the kids are left with sort of memories of her, but because she wasn't there that long, it's less memory and more dreams, that this girl invades their dreams. And these are very subjective dreams, very personal to each one, because they all had different types of relationships with her. So for example, there's Zuniga, who she wanted to be her boyfriend. Then there was another boy who was the only one who actually went to visit her in her house, and they played Space Invaders console game most of the time. But then her dad came home, and he was in uniform because he was a member of Pinochet's repressive sort of security regime. And he also had a false hand. He unscrewed it in front of this boy. And the girl explained how he had a whole host of them upstairs. You know, he could choose different ones at different occasions, which sort of freaked the boy out. And he told everyone else at school, and that he was the last person ever to visit the house because no one would ever want to go there. And you know, so that also infected his dreams of her after she's gone. In that, it was these sort of ghostly hands, a bit like the Thing in the Addams Family, but also it sort of glowed green like the sort of shots in Space Invaders, how in a childish imagination all these things sort of get sort of blended into sort of strange, sort of childish sort of thinking, and then that sort of, you know, feeds into the dreamscape. Another girl was her best friend, and they swapped notes in class and wrote letters to each other. So her dreams are through letters that she sort of pictures in her dreams. Others sort of dream about her visually, but between the three of them, this is why I say it comes very subjective. They all have different versions of how her hair appeared in this dream. And another one only heard her voice. She didn't have the visual picture like the other three. She heard her voice. So all of these sort of childish dreams and sort of nightmares really about this disappeared girl is sort of a motif of something nagging away at their lives even in adulthood when they've all dispersed. And it's the whole thing is a metaphor for about the disappeared in Chile, although it was slightly different in this case because she was a part of a family who were part of the repressive apparatus, so her disappearance is you know, under slightly different circumstances, which I won't spoil. So for me, this was an excellent book. I gave it 4.5 stars rather than 5 because it is very short. It's only 65 pages long, and I always struggle to give short books 5 stars. But it's definitely worth reading, and it's a really good recommendation. But it did prompt a question in me, so hang on because I've forgotten the other book. So this is The Book of Words by Jenny Erpenbeck, which I think was her debut, at least in translated English, because Jenny Erpenbeck is a German writer. And like this, it's about a girl in a family of, you know, part of the security regime. In this case, her father is a torturer. It's never specified, but it's pretty clear that it's in Argentina under the military junta, and that her father is as I say, is a torturer in that regime. So it begs the question, you know, that Nona Fernandes is Chilean, and you know whether she was around, you know, for the Pinochet regime or came in afterwards, I don't know, but the point is it'll be part of her history. Whereas Erpenbeck is German and didn't live what she's describing, but does it make it any less authentic than Nona Fernandes? And I can't answer that question. All I can say is I enjoyed both of these books, even though they're, in a way, they're doing quite similar things. So I'll just throw that out there. And on to Radio Joan, which is Kevin Davey's second book. And this was sent to me by Jonathan Paul, who I know from Goodreads, and we've met up for pre-COVID chats about books. And he's a huge fan of Kevin Davey. His first one was a sort of speculative alternative history about T.S. Eliot actually murdering his wife. This is written in very similar style, but I found much more effective because the style in which it's written in absolutely suited its central metaphor. So it's about a woman called Joan Cade, who was a member of the British Union of Fascists between the wars, and was actually William Joyce's lover until he went and married another woman, much to her heartbreak. Now, William Joyce, if you don't know, he was a deputy of the British Union of Fascists, but then broke with its leader, Oswald Mosley. And he fled to Berlin just before the start of the war. In here it suggested that he was tipped off that he was going to be arrested. And he broadcast from Hamburg. He broadcast English-speaking programmes, which are sort of German propaganda, and he was trying to sort of ruin the morale of his British listeners, sort of, talking about all the German military victories and stuff. And after the war, he was hung as a traitor. Now, William Joyce and Oswald Mosley were real-life characters. Joan Cade, I don't know this for sure, Joan Cade is a fictional creation of Kevin Davey. And the book starts, she's a 90-year-old woman, she's pretty much bedbound, but she seems to have all her wits about her. She's in a care home, and her sort of fellow residents know who she is, and they hate her because she was a member of the British Union of Fascists. And she's being interviewed by a guy who wants to make a documentary about her. Be it a sound documentary for radio or it's not being filmed. And she agrees to that, but she will only have it such as that he is sat behind her, that she cannot see him. And in a way, she's broadcasting her thoughts and her words. She herself is a transmitter. She is lying in this room with 3 different radios, a modern transistor, which keeps sort of losing its signal, or the clarity of its signal, and one of those old sort of walnut encased wirelesses with the sort of all the names of cities all around the world on it for the different frequencies and wavelengths that they were at, which my grandfather had one of those, and they are very beautiful. So the central image of this is radio. Obviously it's what William Joyce used to broadcast his propaganda, it's what Joan is listening to in this room, it's what the writer wants to, he wants this documentary to go out over the radio. And it's the central image extends further, that Joan Cade herself is almost like a radio transmitter, because it dances around from the present to the past, and it's done that, some of the dialogue that she's recounting is heard through the old wireless as if it was back in the early 1930s and being broadcast in real time. And so this radio metaphor, this broadcast metaphor, is really, really central and very effective. That's why I think Davey can dance around time periods. But it's not just that, it's also how it's written stylistically and linguistically. There's almost that sense of ghostly voices sometimes you hear on old-fashioned radios as it's sort of, the tuning picks up a secondary frequency near the one you're trying to listen to. And she's also, because she's losing signal, she's sort of playing around with the tuning dial. So you get all these sort of, as not only ghostly voices, but sort of random sort of snippets of stuff and things just going out of clarity. And that is the style of the writing. Again, I think really, really effective and much more pleasing, I think, than Davey's debut novel, where those writing style was very similar, very fragmented, but I couldn't quite see why. Whereas here, it's absolutely bound up. And, she's a very unreliable narrator. She claims that she was actually recruited by the intelligence service to penetrate the British Union of Fascists and feed back information. She implies that Joyce himself was tipped off by the intelligence services because they wanted to create a legend for him so that he would be recruited by the Germans but actually he would be spying for the British. So it's actually quite sympathetic to this old lady who's ruminating on her lost past and her lost beauty and her lost relationships. It's giving her an out that maybe she was, you know, a double agent all the time. But then she sort of, you know, I think the reader has to make up their own mind. To my mind, you know, she so loved William Joyce and still thinks warmly of him. I think she was a fascist. I don't think she was a double agent in terms of what Davey's feeling is. But I think it speaks to Davey's skill that something as unsympathetic as an old lady once a fascist, that, you know, he treats her credibly so that, you know, we're not 100% sure. So I think this is an interesting book, and also it talks about sort of modern fascism and how most people don't know what they're talking about, you know, and it's much more defined. And of course, there's, you know, like anything, there's a broad range of different fascisms, you know, different beliefs, different ideologies. So yeah, a really excellent read. I wonder if you need to know quite a lot about the peculiarities of interwar Britain to get the most out of this book. It is peculiarly about the British sort of situation then. So I'm not sure how well it would translate to readers from other countries, but you know, for me it was super. As was this, Noopiming by Leanne Betasamosake Simpson. And sorry, I need to get another book. So recently, in a couple of tag videos, I've talked about this book, Scarlett Thomas, Our Tragic Universe, in which this is the story, a search for the storyless story, in which Scarlett Thomas is writing about non-Western traditional storytelling methods, such, you know, and our stories are based still on Aristotelian poetics of, you know, stories have beginning, middle and end, and character arcs and journeys and all of that sort of stuff. And you know, it's something I've thought about a lot, and it makes sense in my head. But this is an absolute pure example of what Scarlett Thomas is talking about. This is storytelling for a non-Western tradition, and it is so refreshing. It is so invigorating to come across this type of writing, you know. So, as I say, she's the author is a First Nation in Canada. It's set amongst her culture. There are 7 characters on the one hand, and they all refer to themselves as they, because they're not just humans, they're also spirits, they're spirit animals, totems. So of the 7 characters that narrate this tale, one is a deer, a caribou deer, one is a tree, and it's all held together by the sort of the lake, the spirit of the lake itself. And it's just brilliant storytelling, because it's not about their individual characters and egos and psyches. It is about the whole culture. You get the picture of the whole culture, and wider than that even, because it's the culture's relationship to planet Earth and nature. And you know, it's the difference between sort of having the focus on one character and their psychology, which is reductive, and this, which is expansive. It traces relationships not only between the members of the tribe, but as I say, out towards nature itself. It's just fabulous, and it's also quite funny in places. So the last 2 sections, one is from the point of view of a flock of geese who are flying in migration, but it's also a metaphor for the tribe itself, because there is a split between the migrants and the residents, i.e. those who want to live on the reservation, are happy to set down roots, versus those who, part of their culture is to always be on the move, to be nomadic, you know, just to sort of exist, you know, where you find yourself. And that is done, as I say, through the formation of a flock of geese, which is really funny and clever about the dynamics of how a flock of geese flies together. And it's not anthropomorphic, because here it is genuinely bedded into the culture of this tribe. And then the last part is called gentrification. And it's about, first of all, it starts with, well, all these trees are sort of being ripped out, you know, as part of the sort of redevelopment of this area of Toronto. And yet then they'll do things like put tree murals on, or use trees as symbols of the housing development and stuff, which is, you know, really quite offensive when you think about it, but brilliantly observed. But then it's about the raccoons, again, also raccoon spirit animals of the tribe, because they are very resourceful in, you know, basically resisting the gentrification, resisting the change of the neighbourhood. No, they come back and they raid the bins, and they, you know, the raccoons adapt to circumstances as the bin sort of security becomes sort of greater and greater. They adapt and find new ways of breaking into it. It's just very, very funny. There's a character here who sets up a swimming pool or a paddling pool, but as a garden ornament, and it's sort of furnished with hyacinth flowers and other things. And the raccoons just basically go and destroy it and rip it up each night as a sort of protest of their resistance. And the other thing that I want to say about the book is, I'm just going to read two bits of it. Is you know, it is a book essentially about ecology and environmentalism, but it's not done as a sort of a political point like, say, Evan Dara's The Lost Scrapbook was, because here it's absolutely embedded into the life of the tribe. So Ninatig is the tree character. To be honest, if anyone is going to get acid, it should be Ninatig. It's just that you certainly do not know what you've lost until it's gone, and Ninatig still has the birds. They still visit hourly. They still come for tea and catch up. They still build their homes in Ninatig's branches. They still say goodbye before their long trips. They still tell Ninatig all the stories and gift the world with their young in Ninatig's canopy. They still sing all the songs. This is so normal for Ninatig that it is Ninatig, and so they can't imagine a reality without it. Unlike Asin lives with the whole and it's driven to fill it. So that's a sort of beautiful sort of writing about, you know, the function of a tree within the tribe, but also if only we could realise, you know, what trees mean to us instead of destroying them for lumber in rainforests and things like that, or even in cities in sort of re-landscaping them. And again, it's this sort of duality or multiplicity of, you know, it's a tree, but it's given human characteristics as well, and it's a spirit. It's just brilliant. And then the last thing, Asin lives with the whole and is driven to fill it, which is really about all of us having desires, and where desire leaches over into addiction, because a lot of addiction is about trying to fill an emptiness within, and the thing you choose, be it drugs, alcohol, gambling, whatever, is naturally doomed to fail to fill that hole. It can't. And then when one of the elders has died and they're having a gathering to sort of send him off, that section is done largely in poems, and I suspect these are lyrics of songs, because Simpson's also a musician who releases albums. And this is the first bit of the first stanza of one of them, called Death by Water. Boil your water for 20 years to remove 2 parts road salt, 1 cup exhaust, 2 tablespoons of arsenic. I mean, as I say, the ecological message comes through without being sort of thrust down your throat. And again, to give a sort of a final version of this, I mean, I find it quite hard to talk about this and express it, because it is so different and outside of one's normal frames of reference that one's talking about novels. But again, just to return to the ecological point, so you know, because they're very often on the move, they erect either sweat lodges or prayer lodges wherever they find themselves. And one of the characters is bemoaning the fact that, you know, saplings would have to die for the frame poles of the lodge, and then realises that there have been all these sort of election signs for candidates that get stuck in, you know, front gardens and stuff. So she resolves to use the wood from these sort of discarded election signs to instead of cutting down fresh saplings. And another character uses empty water bottles, you know, mineral water, sparkling water bottles, plastic ones, again to sort of erect the framework of a lodge. And she is worried that you know, this plastic is gradually decaying, and she's worried about the gases that it's going to release into the air. So there's just so many little details of where, you know, they do meet with the modern world and take on the things from the modern world, and where they're trying to preserve, you know, their traditions, and where things from the modern world are absorbed into the traditions. So there's talk about the plasticity of the brain and reconfiguration, but actually it's the plasticity of their culture within the modern age, and adopting sort of objects, be they objects that they buy in a store or found objects that, you know, the white race have thrown out as refuse and as rubbish, and, you know, like the water bottles, they get absorbed into the culture. So I just thought it's a fabulous 5-star read. And finally, onto Maxwell's Demon by Stephen Hall. So this is Stephen Hall's first book since his debut from 14 years ago. And I do wonder what's the reason behind that. I suspect that he wasn't able to, you know, whatever books he wrote, he wasn't able to get publishing deals for them. And having read this, I actually think, while I admire his ambition, I felt that his debut, the Rorschach text, and now this, actually didn't quite pull off what he was trying to do. And for me, he falls into the same camp as Nicola Barker. I really like their ambition and what they're trying to do with the novel, but I don't actually think they're very successful. So this starts off with a writer who receives a phone call from his dead dad, and that is absolutely the start of Paul Auster's The New York trilogy. And this writer has a mysterious friend who his father mentored and wrote a novel, a crime novel, that became a huge sensation. But then the friend sort of fell foul of the publishing industry and swore that he would never write anything again, much to his agent's chagrin. And sort of drops out of life. No one knows where he is. And this friend sends the writer a strange message, basically sort of, you know, we need to meet, we need to talk. And they do meet up. And what the friends is basically, you know, gradually we get to the bottom of why this friend gave up the publishing industry. And it comes down to sort of digital publishing, that he rejects the notion of words in the ether rather than words in print or on paper, because he places a very powerful magic in the written word, in the invocation of words on paper. You know, that there's a lot of discussion in here about the power of words to evoke things just through the word themselves, and that thing in the Bible where, you know, God said, let there be light, and there was light, and on the second day he divided the seas from the land, and then he gave the power of naming all the animals on earth to Adam. So there is that sort of very strong association of creativity through words, you know, through the logos, through the power of naming, you know, the whole sort of nominalism sort of philosophy, versus the actual materiality of the world, and that's sort of expressed here. Is the world you inhabit right now made more from rocks and grass and trees, or from bank statements, articles, certificates, records, files and letters? And that is sort of one of the major themes of the book. And the other is the concept of entropy, that things are always decaying, that you know, to the sort of maximal state of stability is one in which everything has decayed. And, you know, that's a subject I'm really interested in. But the way it's treated here, and also to some extent the way the nominalism is treated here, is there's lots of information dumps. And one of the ways that Hall does it is he does it in his, which he used in the Rorschach text, but I think more successfully there than here, is in these sort of leaf shapes. And if you sort of, I mean, you're not going to see it on this camera, but if you read them, it is sort of info dumps about theories of entropy or stuff from the Bible, or the ancient Greeks and stuff on these themes of entropy and nominalism and stuff. And I didn't really buy, you know, essentially they're footnotes really, and I didn't buy that was enough to justify making those sort of graphics, word graphics of the leaves. Yes, leaves, autumn leaves that fall from trees blowing around your ankles is a metaphor around his quest, but in and of itself, I didn't think it was strong enough to justify that sort of those sort of visual flourishes. And right towards the end, we sort of zero in on the heart of a leaf, and we get something which I don't want to spoil for you, but I found really unsatisfactory, because it became about male creativity being equated to the female power of procreation, of women being able to give birth, you know, to have a child develop in the womb and then 9 months later give birth. And I get really tired of that trope where, you know, because men can't give birth, our equivalency is to create art. And I don't buy that as an argument. And unfortunately, he sort of succumbed into that in here. And I have to say, by the end of it, you know, the style of this is very interesting, because he keeps nudging you with, you know, keeps feeding you another interesting idea or theory that comes, you know, it is like branches of a tree, I suppose. And each chapter, you move on, he moves you on with an interesting new snippet. It goes in, you know, what he's talked about before goes in an interesting new direction without ever clearing up and resolving what you've just read until towards the very end when he does. And I wonder if that comes from his experience as writing, you know, for console games. I found it very effective. I've actually enjoyed that. And although I said it was infodump, I did enjoy his discussion of things like entropy and nominalism, because they're things I'm interested in anyway. I just didn't think they were embedded in the text. But I did enjoy how he played with the reader. He kept denying us resolution until the very end. And I thought that was really successful. But ultimately, we have this really unsatisfactory equivalency of male creativity and female creativity, plus what you end up here is a version of the Truman Show, which was not satisfying because it's been done. I almost said he wrote himself into a hole, and the only way he could resolve it was to use the mechanism of the Truman Show, which has been done. And so there are lots of books that this is like, or lots of other pieces of art that this is like, including Scarlett Thomas's The End of Mr. Y, including Tom McCarthy's Remainder, as I say, The Truman Show, as I say, Paul Auster's The New York Trilogy. But he doesn't transcend them. He really falls short of what they deliver, I'm afraid. So this was, in the end, quite disappointing. And as I say, you know, that thing about it all coming down to the digitisation of literature. Well, both this sort of mystery writer and maybe Stephen Hall's own view of that is, well, that's all very well, but you know, we've had these things throughout the dawn of man. You know, when Socrates, you know, Plato had Socrates complaining about written language at all and alphabets enabling the writing down of ideas, because he felt that would affect his students' memories, abilities to memorise things, because they wouldn't have to if it was written down. So, you know, 3,000 years ago you had Socrates moaning about a technological development of language, and now the arguments are, well, you know, games are rotting people's, you know, console games are rotting people's brains and rewiring the chemistry, and it will affect them for the worst. Well, you know, these complaints about technology sort of being this threat are nothing new. So for him to sort of, you know, fundamentally centre a character's objection and the reason that he threw away his whole career on a technological development of writing, again, it just didn't win me over. It didn't convince me, as I say, because it's just the latest in a long existing chain throughout human history. So I was really ultimately quite disappointed in this. There were lots of bits that I admired. I liked it as I was reading, but the more it wore on and the more sort of it backed itself into a corner, the less satisfied I was. And by the end, I thought, ambition, but he hasn't been able to realise that ambition, sadly. So I gave this 3.5 stars. But on the whole, as I say, a really good reading week and a half or whatever it was. 5 stars for Noopiming, 4.5 stars for Radio Joan, 4.5 stars for Space Invaders, and 3.5 stars for Maxwell's Demon. Okay, so till next time, thanks very much.